All right, we're going to do a quick summary of Desmos and a little activity to help us get ready for piecewise functions. So students, you'll need to go into Schoology in today's folder. There are directions with a code for you to join the Desmos class. Once you're in there, you will see this screen. This is our first of 18 slides. Our start today is to look at a quick reminder of how to graph lines. So in order to graph a line, easiest option here is just slope-intercept form. So we're going to look at our dotted line here and identify that we have a y-intercept at 4. And if we look at our slope, it appears like we are falling 2 and running 1. So our slope would be -2. So the equation that we would want to type in, we can open our little keyboard here. We would type in y equals a -2x plus 4. All right, and notice that the line now has been filled in. It's no longer a dotted line. When you're going through this activity, make sure that your lines are lining up perfectly with the dotted lines they're giving you. All right, on our next slide, you'll notice that we only have part of a line, just a little segment. So the first thing you want to do is identify the domain. So we are going to basically break our x-axis up and say what chunks of our x-axis do we really want. And we really only want to be between this -2 and a +3. So my domain is going to be that x has to be in between those two values. And then I still need to come up with an equation for that line segment. So once again, we're going to look for our y-intercept, which is down here at -3. And we're going to look at our slope, and it appears our slope is just 1. So we have a domain of -2 to 3, and we have an equation for our line of y equals 1x minus 3. Now how we put that in Desmos is listed right here. So you're going to be typing y equals, and then a brace. Our domain was -2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 3. Then we need a colon, and then we're just putting the equation part, the expression here, in. Since we already have this y equals at the beginning of our statement, we don't need to put that in again. So we would just put in x minus 3 here, and then close that off. Now sometimes your domain is a whole interval where it's less than or equal to just one number. There's not two cutoffs like we have here, two different cutoffs. So you might have statements like these versus having two endpoints to it. All right, so let's go ahead and practice typing that in. So we want y equals our brace. Then we need our domain. So -2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 3. Then we need a colon, and then our expression, x minus 3. And then we're just going to close off that brace. All right, and you'll notice again that our solid line has now covered completely our dotted line. And if you click on the little colored circle next to your equation over here, we can turn this off to see the dotted line, and then turn it back on to see that we have lined up perfectly with it. All right, so let's move on to this one. This one has two pieces. All right, so we have a break here where we've changed which equation we're using. This is a piecewise linear function, so it's just different pieces of lines meshed together. So piecewise linear means that a function is broken into several pieces and that each piece is defined by a linear function. Here the two linear functions are y equals 2x and y equals x minus 2. On what part of the domain is y equals 2x used to define our function? Well, if we look at our two lines here, notice that this one has a y-intercept of 0, and it has a slope, if we look at 2 points here, a slope of 2. So this would be just our equation y equals 2x. This other one has a slope of 1, and if we followed that back and extended it out here, you'd see that our y-intercept is negative 2. So y equals 2x is being used on the left side of my break, and y equals x minus 2 is being used on the right side. So my domain for y equals 2x is everything to the left of my break, so x would have to be less than or equal to 2, or you could simply say x is less than 2. We'll talk about that a little more in our next slide. All right, so how we're going to type this in. Our notation again is to state the domain first, then we have a colon, and then the expression or the right side of our equation for each part of those lines. Okay? Then there's a comma separating the two pieces. So this slide is just having you practice typing that in. So you can go ahead and enter just what you have here and practice seeing that it's going to show up to cover those lines. All right, let's look at another example. So we have two parts again, and we want to look at where that break is happening. So we have things happening to the left of negative 2, and we have a different equation to the right of negative 2. Now you can decide which one is going to be the closed dot on your line, since in Desmos it's really hard to tell. So one of these would be closed and one would be open. So if I have the open one on the left part of the line, then this closed one would imply that I need to have an equal sign there. Totally up to you which one is which. In Desmos, it's not clear. They don't put dots on the ends of the lines. So we have two parts to our graph again. We need to figure out the slope and intercept for each of these lines. So let's look at this one. We have a y-intercept of 1, and it looks like our slope is a positive 2. So my equation would be y equals 2x plus 1. On the left side, I can identify the slope as being 1, but then I have to extend that out a little bit to see that my y-intercept would be 0. So my equation here would just be y equals x. So how we're going to type this in, let's get our keyboard here again. So we are going to use y equals and then our brace. All right, so y equals our brace, and then our first domain we said was x being less than negative 2. And then we want a colon separating the domain from the expression. Our expression was just y equals, our equation, sorry, was y equals x. So we just need the x, since we already have the y equals in front. Then we separate the two different parts of our function with a comma. Our second domain was x being greater than or equal to negative 2, separating it from the expression with a colon, and that expression was 2x plus 1. And then we're going to close it off with another brace. All right, so you can see, again, we can turn this on and off. You can see that my blue line is going to completely cover the orange dotted line that we had. All right, Piecewise functions can include rays, like on the previous screens, or segments, like on this one. On the next screen, you'll see another pair of segments. Your task is to write a piecewise function to match the segments. All right, so notice that on this one we have 3 parts to our graph. We have one part in here between -2 and 0. So that's going to be one of our little domains from -2 to 0. And I'm going to pretend this is a solid dot here, open here. We'll do open here and solid here. All right. So my first domain on the left, we have -2 to 0 for our x values. The slope of my line is 1, and it is hitting the y-axis at 0. So again, this would just be y equals x for my equation for that line segment. For the second branch, it is just a horizontal line up here at 3. So it has the equation y equals 3, and the domain for this is going from 0 to 3. And notice that I had open circles on the end of that, so I am not putting equal signs for my domain. And then the third part has a domain from 3 to 5. And if we look at the slope of our line, we are going down 1 over 1. So our slope is -1. And if we extend that back, you'll see that we're touching here. We would have a y-intercept of 4 if we wanted to extend that line. All right, so now it's just a matter of typing that in. So once again, we are going to start with y equals and then a brace. All right, our first domain, we'll start with the part that I wrote in red. So we have -2 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 0. Then a colon, and we need our linear equation. So y equals x. Since the y equals is in front, we just need the x. Then I put a comma. My next part is what I've written in blue. The domain for that is 0 is less than x, which is less than 3. And the expression for that is just y equals 3, so just a plain 3, comma, and then for the green part, our domain is 3 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 5, colon, and then the equation -x plus 4. All right, so once again, we can turn that on and off. If I turn it off, you can see the dotted lines, the orange ones, and if we turn it on, you can see that the green ones are completely covering the orange ones. All right, so your job is going to be to continue on the remaining 10 slides and make sure you're reading directions and following along.